In the opening moments of The Prestige, we are introduced to the three stages of a magic trick: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige. It's a calm, methodical explanation of deception. The magician shows us something ordinary. Then he does something extraordinary. And finally, he gives us the moment we came for, the part that makes us applaud. We're told something important in this opening narration. The audience doesn't actually want the secret, they want to be fooled. They want to look for the explanation while secretly hoping they never find it. From the very first frame, the film trains us to ask one question: how? How does the bird survive the cage? How does the man disappear from the box? But the real deception isn't happening on stage. It's happening in how us, the audience, interprets the movie itself. For years, the dominant cultural reading of The Prestige has been simple and comforting. It's a story about the cost of greatness. We look at the image of Robert Angier drowning in a water tank night after night and treat it like a poetic metaphor for the grind. But that reading depends on a lie. If you follow the timeline, Angier doesn't start drowning himself to become famous. By the time he steps into Tesla's machine, he is already a household name. He has the theaters and the legacy. He doesn't use the machine to make it, he uses it because he already has. This isn't a story about ambition, it's a story about the nightmare of maintaining. This is The Prestige. The Prestige is usually grouped with other films like Whiplash or Black Swan, stories about people who destroy their bodies and minds in pursuit of a perfect moment. Fingers are lost, bodies are bruised, lives are consumed. We tell ourselves these stories because they satisfy a deep cultural urge, the belief that exceptional people are fundamentally different from us, that they possess some special hunger that justifies their destruction. We turn obsession into a feature of ambition instead of a flaw in psychology. It's a comforting, distancing tactic. If we believe their obsession is a gift, then we don't have to look at our own. But look closely at the nature of the rivalry between Borden and Angier. It isn't a race. A race has a finish line, a trophy, and a moment where the effort stops. What these men are engaged in is something far more grueling, a war of attrition. They are competing to stay relevant, to not lose their place, and to remain visible in a world that forgets you the second you hesitate. This kind of competition has no endpoint because irrelevance is not a destination. It's a perishable state that must be repurchased every single morning. The rivalry isn't the goal, it's the engine. It's the justification for working when rest would be sane, for sacrificing relationships when stability would be enough. It gives their self-destruction a reason. Maintenance, when it's disguised as ambition, looks exactly like obsession. It's the frantic effort of someone who already has everything, but feels like they have nothing if they aren't being watched. It's the terror of the empty stage. Alfred Borden is not pretending to be two people. He is two people. And neither version gets to be whole. One version gets the family, the other gets the loneliness. One gets the wife, the other gets the work. One version loves Sarah, the other version loves the assistant. And neither version gets to exist continuously enough to be fully human. Think about what that means on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. There is a version of Borden who truly loves his wife. He wants to be present, he wants to be known. But then the shift happens. The other brother takes over. The man who walks into the house now feels nothing but obligation. He looks at Sarah and sees a responsibility instead of a relationship. The man who loves her is effectively dead for the next 24 hours, replaced by a ghost who is simply playing the part of a husband. The sacrifice isn't that Borden gives something up. The sacrifice is that he eliminates the possibility of wanting anything outside the trick. He has dismantled his own capacity for a private life. To be known requires a consistent self that exists across time. To be famous only requires the appearance of that self during performance hours. Borden chooses the latter, and in doing so he becomes a stranger to the people who love him most. Angier's fragmentation is more literal and more violent. Every night he steps into a machine knowing that only one version of him will survive. The first time he's terrified. He doesn't know if he'll be the man on stage or the man drowning in a box. But by the 100th time, the fear is gone. It's been replaced by routine. He's no longer a person making a choice. He's a biological process in the theatrical loop, a piece of meat the machine processes to produce a prestige. The trick isn't the point. The trick is just the mechanism that allows the system to consume him. The system in the prestige isn't a government or a corporation. It's a validation economy. Borden and Angier aren't just performing for the audience in the seats. They're performing for a world that grants status only to those who can repeatedly exceed themselves. This is replaceability anxiety disguised as artistic drive. Both men have already achieved what most people will never touch, but none of it is stable. In this world, access is conditional, relevance is temporary, and visibility must be constantly renewed. There's a quiet, seductive horror in how this machine operates. It doesn't scream at you to work, it simply whispers that if you stop, you will be replaced. Incremental improvement doesn't register anymore. If you aren't disrupting the very nature of reality, you're dying. The system follows a brutal mathematical progression, where the only way to remain the same in the eyes of the public is to become exponentially more extreme in private. The system doesn't force obsession, it simply rewards the people who survive it. It reframes rest as weakness and relationships as liabilities. Anything that pulls you away from output becomes a threat to your standing. You end up trapped in a cage where the only way to feel alive is to hear applause from people who would replace you without hesitation if your trick failed. You're not building a legacy, you're feeding a furnace that runs on identity. What happens internally isn't a breakdown, it's an adaptation. Identity contracts around achievement until achievement is the only thing that feels real. Everything else becomes friction. Not something you value, but something that gets in the way. When Sarah looks at Borden and says, "Not today," she isn't talking about his schedule. She's talking about his absence. She can tell which version of him she's speaking to, and the realization destroys her. Because she understands that she isn't married to a man hiding a secret. She's married to a secret. She's in love with a man who only exists 50% of the time, and the other 50% is occupied by a stranger wearing her husband's skin. Angier's adaptation is colder and more hollow. By the final act, there's nothing behind his eyes. He performs presence the way he performs the trick. He has drowned the self so many times that the remaining version is just a shell designed to execute a sequence of movements. The self has become optional, expendable. This is the part we usually miss. The adaptation is permanent. You don't just turn off the performer when you go home. You eventually find that there is no one else to turn on. This is the same rule that tells us our life will begin once our work is finished, while quietly ensuring the work never ends. We tell ourselves we are working this hard so that one day we can finally be someone, ignoring the fact that the person we wanted to be is being erased by the work itself. When you prioritize output over essence long enough, the essence disappears. Nolan's direction mirrors the psychology of the characters. The film itself behaves like a machine. Scenes repeat, images echo, perspectives loop back on themselves. Nothing progresses, everything just iterates. The characters don't grow, they optimize. Watch Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman in the later stages of the film. They don't emote, they execute. Reflection is gone, only function remains. They've become brands, nothing more. Every action is calculated for its effect on the rivalry. Every word is a move on a chessboard. They have lost the ability to have a private moment that isn't dedicated to the public performance. Nowhere is this more evident than in the logistics of the trick itself. Focus on the water tanks. The film doesn't linger on the spiritual horror of the soul being copied. It lingers on the mechanism. The trapdoor, the lever, the padlock, the disposal. It treats a human life like a spare part, a replaceable component in a larger system of production. The tragedy isn't that Angier dies. The tragedy is that he budgets for it. He has integrated his own self-destruction into his business model. He treats his own death as a necessary operating expense, a line item in the ledger of his legacy. He has finally become the perfect product, one that requires no maintenance, only replacement. The film itself isn't really a Victorian period piece, it's more of a characteristic. If you listen to the language of modern performance and hustle culture, you'll hear the same three-stage structure. Number 1, the pledge. Be willing to do what others won't. It's the total surrender of the ordinary life. Number 2, the turn. Sacrifice everything for the vision. The normalization of the extreme. And number 3, the prestige. Results justify the cost. The erasure of the process in favor of the outcome. In this framework, the part of you that wants balance becomes a weakness. The part that wants rest becomes a liability. Compliance gets renamed as discipline. We've created a world where we see people whose entire identity has collapsed into their work, and we call it dedication. We celebrate the entrepreneur who hasn't seen his kids in a month as a titan. We celebrate the artist who creates until they bleed as prolific. But the prestige calls it what it actually is: a suicide pact with your own ambition. It shows us that you can win the game of status and still lose the game of being a person. It highlights that the most successful version of the transported man is the one who has no original self left to go home to. It's a seductive trap because the world applauds while you burn. The final images of the film are devastating. Angier dies surrounded by the bodies of his own discarded selves, literally a basement full of his own potential, wasted for the sake of a nightly standing ovation. Borden walks away with his daughter, and on the surface, it feels like a victory. It isn't. Borden is the half that survived. His wife is dead. His other half is dead. He leaves as a fragment, someone who won a game that erased everything he was playing for. He is a man who spent his life pretending to be someone else, only to find that there is no him left to return to. The film never asks if this is worth it. It asks if you noticed what stopped being counted while you were busy applauding. Revenue, titles, and followers are all easy to measure, but none of them measure coherence. None of them measure presence. The system doesn't need you to be a person. A person is inefficient, emotional, and unpredictable. A transported man is scalable, reliable, and productive. If any of this feels familiar, if you've ever found yourself performing presents for your family while your mind was still in the office, or if you've ever felt a hollow dread at the thought of a weekend without a goal, then you've already felt the edges of the tank. You don't have to answer right now whether you're becoming a copy of yourself, but once you see the tanks, you can't unsee them. Every night you drown something human to save something professional. Another box gets added to the basement. You aren't just performing the trick, you're becoming it. This is all part of a larger pattern in cinema that reflects our modern condition. In Eyes Wide Shut, we saw how access works, how the desire to belong to an elite tier keeps people compliant and silent. In The Social Network, we saw how leverage works, how the drive to build something massive eventually isolates the winner until they are alone in a room refreshing a page. And in The Prestige, we see how obsession works, how the need to remain useful eventually turns survival into self-erasure. Access, leverage, obsession, the pledge, the turn, the prestige. The trick isn't that the system controls you through force. The trick is convincing you that you chose it, that your self-destruction is actually your greatest achievement. You spend your life trying to get out of the tank, only to realize you're the one who locked it from the inside. If you found this analysis helpful, consider subscribing to the channel. We're continuing this series by looking at the films that define our relationship with work, status, and the systems we inhabit. Until next time, thanks for watching, and please take care of yourselves.